There's a new head coach and offensive coordinator in Seattle, but is that a good or bad thing for guys like DK Metcalf, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, and Kenneth Walker? We discussed the Seahawks 2024 fantasy outlook today on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I am a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, fantasy betting, everything you could think about in the offseason at sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. So today we're going to get into all of the Seahawks 2024 fantasy outlook for all of the big players. We hit on all of the Rams fantasy outlook on yesterday's show. So if you missed that, go listen to that after this episode. But getting into the Rams from last year, right? They had the same record as they did in their exciting 2022 season at 9-8, but it just felt worse, right? They averaged the 17th most points per game in the NFL, 11th most fantasy points per game. They had DK Metcalf sitting there at wide receiver 20 at half point PPR, Kenneth Walker, RB20. Geno Smith dropped significantly from the quarterback 10 he was in fantasy in 2022 to quarterback 25 in 2023. So things just kind of felt like average, right? Nothing too exciting happening with the Seahawks last year. But now they changed head coaches. So Pete Carroll's out. Now we have Mike McDonald. He is a defensive-minded coach. They change offensive coordinators. So do we think there'll be a change there? Let's get into the top guys, the two stars on the team that lead this offense, DK Metcalf and Kenneth Walker. So DK Metcalf finishes a wide receiver 20, like I mentioned last year. He's going around the same range in drafts this year. Do you think that's fair for him, or do you think he's being undervalued going into this season?
He might be a little bit undervalued. I think we need to see this offense develop, but keep in mind he was second on the team in targets to Tyler Lockett. That's probably going to change this year. As Tyler Lockett is a little older, he will turn 32 this summer. We'll get into more on his value and what Jaxon Smith-Njigba could bring and where you want to go with those wide receivers. But I think all this lines up for Metcalf being treated like the alpha in this offense. And we look at the Washington offense. It's very interesting that they went the college route, and not only the college route, they just looked down the street in Seattle and found Ryan Grubb, who just helped the Washington Huskies get to the championship game against Michigan Wolverines, did it with Michael Penix Jr. We know he's in the NFL, and not only is Rome Odunze in the NFL, but the other two wide receivers are as well. Jalen Polk is with the Patriots. Jalen McMillan is with the Buccaneers. So this was this level of passing game. It was one of the pass happiest teams in college football last year. But when you look at that, I mean, the number might seem lower, but keep in mind, a lot of these teams, when they dominate, they just run over some bad teams. So that's why it's not too high. It was 58%. It is notable that the Seahawks threw 61% of the time with Shane Waldron, who's now with the Bears as their former offense coordinator. So this is all good news for Metcalf. And even with those three receivers, Michelle, in Washington, Rome Odunze really separated. Those other two guys were talented, and they had their own productive moments, not only in their final seasons, but before. But Odunze totally dominated. He was the alpha, and what was Odunze? A big target with a body that can stretch the field, much like DK Metcalf. So this is all we can go on with Ryan Grubb. We don't have a lot of NFL connection there, right, to say this is this player from there, but we go with what we have. And it was a pro style offense, obviously pass happy, where you spread the ball around to your main receiver. So if that has any parallel, we got to feel really good about DK Metcalf. And I think he might be a value at wide receiver 20.
Yeah, I'm really hoping they open up the passing game more. They should be utilizing DK Metcalf more. There's no reason he's not the top target on his team. I will say, I feel like we forget he went through an injury last year. He played through it for the most part. He only missed one game, but he had the hip and rib injury in like early middle of the season. He ended up missing week 7, just one game, played through it, but it clearly affected him because like he started the season fine for fantasy, no like huge games, but somewhat consistent. And then it's like weeks 6 through 9, just absolutely miserable. 8 points, 9 points, 6 points. And then he started to get ramped back up once it feels like he got healthier. And even in like the last 5 games of the season, I'm taking out week 18, but last 5 games of the fantasy season, he scored 5 touchdowns during that span, had a couple 100-yard games. So I do think we could be devaluing him, especially if they are going to open up this passing game, allow Geno Smith to throw more often downfield, because he's been really good at that too. He has the second most downfield touchdowns in the league over the last 2 years, behind only Josh Allen. So I hope Ryan Grubb can even open this up more. Now, let me ask you, would you rather DK Metcalf? We brought this up yesterday. We already said we'd rather DK Metcalf than Cooper Kupp, but DK Metcalf or T. Higgins?
Yeah, to me, DK Metcalf is going to be treated more as the alpha, and that's where I think I'm not as hot on T. Higgins, especially with the way this offseason has gone for him, just not totally being invested with the Bengals than this type of player. I think Metcalf will be treated more like the alpha. I like Higgins as a number 2, one of the better number 2s in the league to produce, and a very good fantasy asset when he's on the field. But I think Metcalf is a little bit special. We know what his big playability is. He just has to raise his catch percentage. It was 55.1%. Him and Geno Smith need to kind of connect more. The good news is this guy averages 16.9 yards per catch. So if he can bump that up to around 61, 65%, what his normal average is, he's going to make a lot of big plays and he's going to score more. What I want to see is use them like T. Higgins, right? Move them around, shorter passes. Don't always depend on the big plays. Get them in that position to score. So I trust them a little bit more in getting them the ball, and that's why I like them more than Higgins.
Yeah, the nice thing about DK is he's really consistent with his touchdowns too, right? Like you can pretty
Yeah.
much write down 8 touchdowns for him. So I
That's a
agree. I
floor
really
too.
like Higgins
So.
this year, but I would go with Metcalf. I have one more question for you. DK Metcalf or Mike Evans? Kind of similar play styles here.
Yeah, it's funny. They both kind of were related to the offense. They had Dave Canales pass through both cities here in Seattle and Tampa Bay. So interesting parallels, and that's where we liked Mike Evans in relation to Metcalf. So that's a tough one. I still go with Mike Evans. I mean, he's just so consistent, and he also is a guy. Remember, had a lot of catch issues and rate drops and all that. So again, Evans is just a little bit more polished and consistent. That's why I'm going there.
I think I'm going to go with Metcalf because I have optimism about the change in OC. While in Tampa Bay, I'm a little bit more nervous about their change
That's
in
a
OC
good
because
point.
Dave Canales was so good. So I lean Metcalf there, but it is close. Let's move on to the running game with Kenneth Walker because he's their second best fantasy asset, or at least he was last year, right? Kind of an up and down year, really, really depended on touchdowns. So he did end as an RB20 in fantasy points per game last year at 12.3 points per game and half PPR, right between James Cook and Brian Robinson Jr. So very average season for a running back. That's a low RB2, not great. But in the 8 games, he scored 0 touchdowns. He averaged 6.8 fantasy points per game and half PPR. Like he's not too involved as a receiver. He doesn't get consistent work. Do we think he gets more consistent work in this new offense? And do you think he's worth that 3rd, 4th round pick in fantasy drafts this year?
Yeah, this is really hard to say. I mean, he was a pretty high target, or I would say target and touch share here for Walker. So that's a good thing. He's way ahead of Zach Charbonnet in terms of that. I think it was like 63 to 37, something like that with the touches. So he's still treated like the lead back. I don't think this coaching staff is going to kind of blow that up. They see what Walker has done. He's been rather productive. I think, yeah, that pass catching is always going to limit him. So I think he's about where you're at again. Like I don't necessarily see him shooting up from this. And I also don't see him really giving up too much to Charbonnet. So it's not an exciting RB2, but if he's a guy that you just want to put in your lineup, forget it, play him every week, regardless of the matchup, you'll get the numbers. It just won't be all that exciting, and he's not going to win you a lot of weeks. So just keep that in mind when you're drafting him as that RB2. And I think late RB2. That's how I feel about him still here. So maybe I would lean later, 4th round than 3rd round.
Yeah, I will say, I think I'm more worried about Zach Charbonnet than you are. It's not so much like I'm excited about Zach Charbonnet. I just think he might bite into his workload a little bit more. So Zach Charbonnet actually had a higher team target share than Kenneth Walker last year. It was close, 7.3 to 6.8. He had 40 targets compared to Walker's 37. And also, I was shocked by the offensive snaps last year. Walker had 498 offensive snaps. Charbonnet had 472. only 26 fewer snaps. Now, the workload was completely different, but I am shocked with how much he was on the field. So maybe we see the workload shift more, especially with the change of coaches. We don't know what way they're going to go. So I am a little bit lower on Walker. Like looking at his ADP right now, like he's going right after James Cook, much prefer James Cook with his upside. And then he's going one spot after Joe Mixon and a little bit before Aaron Jones. I think I would prefer Aaron Jones and Joe Mixon to Walker. It's close with Aaron Jones, but I definitely prefer Mixon.
Yeah, I just think I haven't seen too much of Charbonnet yet to feel like he's better than Walker. Like there could be that sentiment at some point this season. Again, regardless, is Walker's not a player I'm circling to target, right? If I get stuck and oh great, all these guys are gone at RB2. I need to get a player here before it's too late. I'm gonna go there. So I'm gonna lean on the lower side here as well for Walker.
In the next segment, we're gonna get into, will the Seahawks finally kind of lean off of Tyler Lockett, go to the younger, more exciting wide receiver in Jaxon Smith-Njigba. We hope he can break out in year 2. We'll get into all of that in just a moment. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. It's baseball season. If you live near a stadium, or even if you don't, but you just wanted to go to a baseball game on any given day, and you're not a planner, like I'm not a planner, I choose the day of, just hop on the Game Time app. It's the easiest app to use for finding really good tickets. You don't have to worry about anything, and you're going to get those tickets in an instant. And it's going to be the best price guaranteed. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the world. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. You get to see the images of your seat before you buy, so no worries there. And then the tickets are just sent directly to your phone. So it's not like you have to dig through emails to try to find where they went to. Take the guessing work out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's code LOCKEDON NFL, Locked On NFL, for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So we need to talk about Lockett Smith. I've put together Jaxon Smith-Njigba and Tyler Lockett because those two kind of do intertwine, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that word is.
Yeah, intertwine, interchange, whatever.
Because if Lockett's going to be as involved next year, then unfortunately JSN's not going to break out. But how do you see this working out this next year with a new offense? Because last year Lockett still led the team in targets. Now it was close between him and Metcalf, but he shouldn't be leading the team in targets anymore. He's 32 years old, or he will be. His efficiency went way down last year. On 3 more targets than Metcalf, he put up over 230 fewer yards than Metcalf. I think the Lockett experience should kind of end. He's getting older, not as efficient, and move over to JSN. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I wish they had traded him to the Steelers and
Same.
I know you probably want this, but yeah, I don't think he's been the same type of producer since he lost his guy Russell Wilson. Remember that ridiculous stat where they had a perfect passer rating connecting early in their career? He's just not been the same. But I have to hand it to Tyler Lockett. He's had a very good career. If you look at it, it's underrated. He's been a pretty decent fantasy asset, but I think that time might be over again. Turns 32 on September 28th. I think you could see him kind of slowing down a bit. I mean, he's ranked as wide receiver 46 and 106 overall. So the problem is there's a lot more upside guys right next to him that are much more enticing. You have Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman, some of these guys that, oh man, these are some rookies that are on their way up. So don't fall in that trap. I think I would take some of these rookies. He's a guy that I think is going to trap a lot of casual fantasy players, right? Oh, he's a name, he's good, productive, but no, this is a changing of the guard that's going here. And what I'm disappointed is, with the consensus rankings overall, we just have Jaxon Smith-Njigba at 44 and at 96 overall. So 10 spots between these two guys. That means someone is flipping a coin. They're not sure, but I would be more certain about JSN. I mean, you can't have this big of a drop off between Metcalf and JSN, especially on a team that throws this much and the targets, right? Between these two guys, it was pretty darn high there last year. So right now, you're looking at a bump, right? I think you look at Metcalf getting a bump from his 22% target share. Lockett was at 22.3 to lead the team. Jason had 17. So you would see maybe this kind of flip around where you have Metcalf maybe at 24. You've got maybe Lockett dropping down to 15 to 16. And then you're seeing Smith-Njigba probably go up to like 20% at least. So if all that happens, Michelle, I think it really adds up to JSN. I don't think they're silly or dumb about this. I know they've changed their coaching staff, but keep in mind their GM is still there. And he took Jaxon Smith-Njigba for a reason, clearly to replace Tyler Lockett. They knew he was getting older. So I think that transition happens now. So I think JSN is criminally undervalued there in relation to Lockett.
And they did lose two of their tight ends, right? And Will Disley and Kobe Parkinson.
You're not going to run that stuff anymore either. So that's good. Like,
yeah, hopefully more 11 personnel. Get JSN on the field more. He like his team percent of snaps really stayed steady all year long. We didn't see that growth we'd like to see in rookies. Clearly under Lockett and Metcalf and offensive snaps throughout the year. He did see so many more targets and snaps than any other wide receiver on the team. So he's clearly the wide receiver 3 at worst. I think he does step into that wide receiver 2 role. But even if you don't like Jaxon Smith-Njigba to step up this next year, I still don't even want to take Tyler Lockett. I get it. He has some bigger games, but last year, like he's been inconsistent his whole career in fantasy. Like you normally always had those big blow up games with Russell Wilson and then some lower games. But last year it got really bad where he would have a solid game, like an okay game, but then in between would be 2 or 3 games of doing absolutely nothing, like 6 points, 7 points. There is a 3-game week of 7, 4, 7, another one of 3 and 1. Like he's not giving you big enough games to risk those just destroying you in your lineup game. So I'm not going to take Tyler Lockett. I'd rather, like you said, take a risk on the rookie Ladd McConkey, who could be the leading tight end or leading target for the Chargers, or any of the other rookies that maybe like Keon Coleman could be the leading target for the Bills, or even Khalil Shakir, second year, maybe could be leading target for the Bills. But there's other guys you can take later that at least give you some ceiling. Now with JSN, would you rather take a shot on JSN or Xavier Worthy starting his first year with the Chiefs?
I need to see what happens with Rashee Rice. If the status quo is here with Rice and nothing is going to happen, I think I would take JSN because, again, Worthy is going to be no more than the 3rd, maybe the 4th target, right? If Marquise Holloway-Brown is there. But I know JSN really could be the 2nd target of this team.
I think that's fair. Worthy's so exciting, though, because of what he can do in that offense. But, yeah, that's fair. What about Christian Watson or JSN?
Yeah, I think I have to go with JSN again. I really think he is very talented. And, again, he was the first wide receiver drafted last year for a reason. So, Watson, too many guys he has to jump through here to get the targets from Jordan Love. Well, I think JSN really clear path to major targets here.
One more. Deontay Johnson, who's now with the Panthers. We don't know how he's going to be utilized, or JSN.
Yeah, I'm not interested in some of these guys. Like Deontay Johnson is similar to me to Tyler Lockett or even DeAndre Hopkins. I just don't want to. These are all traps. People are going to say, oh, this guy was reliable at one point. No, there's a lot of upside at wide receiver, not just from the rookies that are unknown, but last year's class as well. The arrow's pointing up for all these guys. I mean, this theme, wide receiver, the drafts, just go for the young stars here. That's where you're going to get the value here. There's a lot of guys fading into their 30s. Don't chase those guys.
Only chase Mike Williams.
Yeah,
for the 3-year-old guys. I'm still on the Mike Williams train.
If the value is low enough, yes, we can go after Mike Williams. But yeah, at least Mike Williams has a history of some explosiveness and something that we can look forward to. And he's still rather young in relation to some of these other guys. But this is what happens. We try to figure out an AJ Green or Julio Jones at the end of the career. You're just not going to get that value. And the same thing with these older receivers. I mean, it really drops off. We talk about running backs at 30. If you get past 31 at wide receiver, it's really hard to extract that. None of these guys are really Randy Moss or Terrell Owens where they can last as long. So just something to keep in mind there. And we'll talk about the guy throwing the ball to these guys and see if he can have better fantasy value here in our final segment of the show. All right, so we had another series end, and we have the Edmonton Oilers. They're in the conference finals as well. They'll be taking on the Dallas Stars. On the other side, you have the Florida Panthers and the New York Rangers. So a lot of good NHL action there. We also have some individual superstars in the NBA conference finals that we can look at their numbers here. Jason Tatum, Luka Doncic. So excited for all those series and all that NBA and NHL action here. It's winner take all time as we're getting closer to the NBA finals and Stanley Cup finals. And FanDuel is where you want to go to get your best shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props. I talked about with Tatum and Doncic. Good one to go after there, and much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make sure every playoff shot counts for you. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Michelle, a couple years ago, I used Geno Smith as a steady streamer, and he helped me win a championship. Last year, I did not go after Geno Smith because I knew probably he was going to fall back down to earth. So I don't know what to think about him this year. I mean, those are extreme cases. We talked about it at the top. He went from QB 10 in average scoring to QB 25 in average scoring. So I have no idea where to go with him exactly this year. I'm hopeful with him in the new offense. At least I think, let's start with this. I don't think he's going to lose his job to Sam Howell, which is the first good thing here, that at least he'll be on the field as a starter.
What is funny is that he scored the same exact amount of fantasy points per game as his now teammate Sam Howell last year. Those two were at 15.2 points per game on the dot last year, which I just thought was funny. I will say, so the biggest issue with Geno Smith from 2022 to 2023 was his completion percentage dropped by 5%. And his touchdown percent dropped significantly too. It went from 5.2 to 4.0. So he had 30 passing touchdowns in 2022, and that dropped down to 20. Like we figure that might happen after his really, like, these guys go up and down, especially like if you're not a Mahomes or a Josh Allen or a Joe Burrow or a player like that, like, and you're just like a guy like Geno Smith or Baker Mayfield, those touchdowns are going to be highly inconsistent. So could he throw 30 next year? Sure. He could also throw 18. We have no idea. It's Geno Smith. I will say, like, I have positivity with him in this offense. I'm hoping the offensive line is better. They changed up their offensive line a lot. They had 7 different offensive linemen start at least 6 games for them last season, dealt with a lot of injuries. And then also like tackle Abraham Lucas, who had a really nice rookie season in 2022. He missed 11 games with a knee injury. So you would hope this offensive line is better. They signed Laken Tomlinson. He's a solid enough left guard to fix that role. They added a better backup tackle in case there is injuries at the tackle position. So I think that will be huge for him because Geno's been sacked 77 times over the last 2 years, third most in the NFL, behind only Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. So I think if he can be protected better, we know he can throw a good deep ball. We know he has the weapons. Hopefully in this offense, they can figure out how to protect him better.
Yeah, I think he also padded his stats a little bit with some running there that helped and some scoring that way. So he's not a terrible runner, but he's not going to give you too much, and you're not going to look to that aspect of his game to like increase his value. So that's something to keep in mind. But I thought it was very interesting. They changed their interior line at guard and center, but really not a lot of other changes. When you bring in an offense and you're just blowing things up, even the Howell situation, they traded for him because they needed someone to replace Drew Lock, who went on to go to the Giants. So they more just needed a backup body there, and they had to do that, or they would have had an empty depth chart behind Geno Smith. So there's a lot of confidence maybe that this existing crew can get it done in this offense. And I think maybe that was intentional a little bit with Mike McDonald. I think he wanted to change their defensive philosophies to get their pass rush going, but maybe he saw, okay, this is not too bad. What we've seen here with Shane Waldron, the numbers are decent, but let's just open it up a little bit more, take advantage of what we have and build on it, right? So that's a good sign for Geno Smith. There's no competition. They didn't go out and get a rookie franchise passer. He's going to be a bit motivated because they restructured his contract, a little bit easier to get out of it now. So I'm just interested to see what Geno can do. But again, I'm not a guy I'm targeting, but I did grab him in a 2 QB league and Superflex, I think that's a good place for Geno. I'm just not going to see him as more than a matchup kind of streamer if I'm going in a 1 QB league.
Yeah, and that's how you felt in 2022, right? It's
Yeah.
not like you're pumped to play him in any given week. He had some good games, he had some down games. I don't see him as like a league winning type, so I'm not going to be excited to take him. If it's in a 2 quarterback league and you really wait on your second quarterback, I think he's fine. But like, so he's going in the range of Baker Mayfield and Will Levis and Derek Carr and Daniel Jones. Like, in those guys, like Geno Smith has the same upside as them. I do think I like Daniel Jones with the most upside, and he is participating in practice already coming off that ACL. But like, if you had to choose between Baker Mayfield or Geno Smith as your second quarterback in a super flex or 2 quarterback league, which one would you feel better about?
It's funny because both those guys had Dave Canales, who turned them into fantasy assets, and now they don't have Dave Canales, and the new offense is all together. So it's really close there. I mean, you could almost do the Spider-Man meme with these guys because they're very similar. They're a little bit mobile. They've got 2 basic wide receiver assets. They're trying to figure out a third and fourth. So they're like the same quarterback, and it could come down again to what you said, the volatility with touchdowns. Now, if I'm getting excited about upside, though, I'm looking at McCarthy and Levis in that group. I mean, I just look at some of the weapons these guys have. And if I want to get excited about my quarterback in this situation, that could be a league winner. So that's the problem, I think, with the Carr and the Baker and the Geno Smith picks, right? And it's just, and Daniel Jones, even. There's a new wave of quarterbacks in there. We talked about Jaden Daniels going a little bit higher than these guys as well. There's just so much more excitement and upside. I mean, Will Levis is in a great offensive system. So is JJ McCarthy. So I might go for the unknown, but with higher upside here than, okay, Geno's a little touchdown fluctuation. He could be QB 15, he could be QB 19, where these guys I think could have the upside to be in the 12. So that's how I kind of look at my second quarterback, even in leagues where I feel good about my first quarterback. It's happened a lot of times where my number 2 becomes my number 1 because I drafted a guy with upside. So just don't draft Geno Smith. Oh, he's a solid backup, right? Draft him if you think he's got the upside. But I think these younger quarterbacks certainly do.
Now, maybe instead of Baker or Geno Smith. I mean, Baker or Geno Smith had the good fantasy year in 2022 under Dave
Yeah,
Canales.
I know where
Baker
you're
had the
going.
good season in 2023 over Dave Canales. And then now is it Bryce Young's turn? Maybe he's the guy you take over any of these guys. And I'm starting to get on the Bryce Young train a little bit.
Maybe that's what it should be. Dave Canales, sleeper Q. Dave Canales, QB. Insert here QB 10, right? That's what we're looking for. So maybe that's what happens, right? You just chase the coordinator, don't chase the quarterback. So maybe there's something to it. And we will get to them at some point. We get to the Panthers and you can talk all about their upside. I think you're right. We're going to find out a lot more about Bryce Young here in year 2. We're just like we're going to find a lot about the Seahawks here in their first year with McDonald. I think it's going to be pretty good.
It should be solid. I don't know if I see them as a playoff team, but I think they'll be fighting for a spot there at the bottom of the NFC for a playoff position. That is it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every dayers, Vinnie and I will be back to talk about the 49ers fantasy outlook for next season. And then on Thursday, we'll get to the Cardinals to wrap up the NFC West. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.